I never thought my life would take such a weird turn. My name's John Everett, and I'm just your average guy, a software engineer, living in a quiet suburb of Willow Creek. I've always liked the peaceful, predictable rhythm of my life here. Nothing much ever happens. That is, until the night I decided to check out the traveling circus that rolled into town. I wasn't expecting much, just a bit of nostalgia and some cheap thrills. You know, the usual circus stuff, acrobats, animals, maybe a creepy clown or two. But man, I had no idea how things would change after that. That night, the circus was packed. Families with kids, couples on dates, the usual crowd. The performances were a little eerie, but nothing too out of the ordinary, until I saw him. There was this clown, standing completely still, just staring at me. No exaggerated laughter, no balloon animals. He was silent. It wasn't like he was performing. It felt personal, like his eyes were locked on mine the whole time. I remember feeling this odd, creeping unease wash over me, but I told myself it was just part of the act. When the show ended, I couldn't shake the feeling. As I walked back to my car, I swear I saw him again, standing at the edge of the parking lot, still watching me. But I convinced myself I was just being paranoid, that it was probably one of those circus gimmicks to keep people on edge. I mean, clowns are supposed to be creepy, right? I laughed it off, started the car, and drove home, eager to forget about the whole thing. But looking back now, I wish I had paid more attention to that nagging feeling in my gut. The drive home was quiet, too quiet. I live about 15 minutes from the fairgrounds, but it felt longer that night. The streets seemed unusually empty for a Friday night, and even though I kept telling myself to chill out, I found myself glancing at the rearview mirror more times than I'd like to admit. I expected to see him, the silent clown, standing there in the middle of the road, but thankfully, I didn't. Still, there was this heavy weight in my chest, like something was off. Once I got home, I locked the doors and went straight to bed, trying to shake off the strange vibe. It didn't work. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the way that clown just stood there, not moving, not smiling, just watching. It's like his face was burned into my mind. But hey, maybe I was just overreacting. People go to circuses for the thrills, and sometimes your mind plays tricks on you, right? The next morning, everything seemed normal again. I made coffee, sat down to work on a few projects, and told myself the whole thing was just a weird dream. But no matter how much I tried to forget it, that feeling stayed with me. I couldn't help but wonder if the clown was still out there, watching. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a dull, creeping anxiety that settled in my bones. That's when the dream started. It started out subtly, you know. I didn't even realize it was happening at first. The clown began showing up in my dreams, just standing there off in the distance with that same silent grin on his face. At first it wasn't too bad. I'd be dreaming about something random, and then suddenly, there he was, like a piece of the background that didn't belong. He never moved, never made a sound. He was just there, watching. Honestly, I shrugged it off, thinking maybe my mind was playing tricks on me after that weird night at the circus. But things escalated pretty fast. The dreams started happening more often, and the clown, he was getting closer. Every night it was like he was inching toward me, step by step, but still without moving. You know how dreams are. They don't make sense. But this one felt different. It was real, too real. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. His grin kept haunting me, that cold, unnatural smile. I started to dread going to bed. Sleep wasn't an escape anymore. It was a trap. The worst part was that he never said a word. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to suffocate me, like the air got thicker whenever he appeared. It's hard to explain, but the silence was almost louder than anything else. It filled the space between us, pressing down on me, making it impossible to breathe. I tried to tell myself it was just a bad dream, that clowns are supposed to be creepy, and my brain was just holding on to that night at the circus. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Each night, the clown's grin seemed wider, more menacing. He never did anything, just stood there, staring. but the tension built like a pressure cooker, ready to explode. I kept telling myself to snap out of it, but when I woke up, the fear stuck with me. It wasn't the kind of fear you can just shake off. It clung to me, wrapping itself around my chest and refusing to let go. And the worst part? I knew it wasn't just a dream, not anymore. I started losing sleep, and it showed. My coworkers noticed the bags under my eyes, the way I zoned out during meetings. "You all right, John?" they'd ask, but what could I say? "Yeah, I'm just being stalked by a clown in my dreams." Yeah, that would have gone over real well. So I laughed it off, made excuses, but the truth was, I was terrified. Every night was the same. He was always there, always closer. I'd wake up and that grin would be burned into the back of my eyelids. It wasn't just the dreams that were getting worse. During the day, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing behind me. I knew it didn't make any sense, but it felt like he was bleeding into my waking life, like the boundary between dreams and reality was starting to blur. And every time I closed my eyes, even for a second, I saw his face. That silent, unmoving face, grinning like he knew something I didn't. It was then that I realized, this wasn't just a dream. Something was wrong, something far worse than I could have imagined. And the clown, he wasn't done with me yet. The thing is, after a while, the dreams stopped feeling like dreams. It's hard to describe, but I started noticing the clown in places he shouldn't be. During the day, when I was wide awake. At first, it was little things, like seeing his face reflected in a shop window as I walked by, or catching a glimpse of him in the side mirror while driving. Every time I'd do a double take, and of course he'd be gone. But for that split second, I knew it was him. That same twisted grin. It started happening more often, and I was beginning to wonder if I was losing it. One day, I was at work, just sitting at my desk, when I caught his reflection on my computer screen. It was subtle at first, like a shadow in the background. But as I leaned in closer, there he was, standing right behind me, grinning like always. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked my chair over, but no one was there. Just the usual office chatter and people typing away at their keyboards. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't focus on anything after that. How could I? He was everywhere, lurking just out of sight. I tried to tell myself it was stress. That had to be it, right? A combination of lack of sleep and a mind overworked from the long hours at the office. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the worse it got. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was always watching me, waiting for something. The dreams, the reflections, it was all too much. I even thought about talking to someone, but who would believe me? "Hey, I'm being followed by a clown that only shows up in reflections." Yeah, not exactly something I wanted to say out loud. The worst part was, no one else saw him. I asked my best friend if he'd noticed anything strange, but of course he just looked at me like I was nuts. "John, you've got to relax, man. You're overworking yourself," he'd say, but it didn't help. The clown's presence was too real, too heavy to just dismiss. It felt like he was getting closer, like he was breaking through whatever thin barrier kept him from fully stepping into my life. I could hear faint circus music in the distance sometimes, but I hadn't been near a circus since that night. It was all in my head, or at least I hoped it was. I tried to distract myself, keeping busy with work, going out with friends, anything to avoid being alone with my thoughts. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became. He was everywhere, on bus windows, in store glass, even in puddles on the street after it rained. I'd look down and there he was, grinning up at me like it was all a sick joke. I was being hunted, and there was no escape, not in my dreams, not in reality. The line between the two was gone. I'd wake up in a panic, not sure if I was still asleep or if the clown was really standing at the foot of my bed. And during the day, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, certain I'd see him standing there, silent, waiting. The worst part was knowing that no one else could see him. It was just me. Whatever this was, it had singled me out, and no one else had a clue. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming, that the clown was only getting started. I'll never forget the night it all escalated. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, though sleep had become something of a nightmare in itself. The room was dark, the kind of quiet that's too quiet, you know? I was tossing and turning, my mind racing with every shadow that passed through the window. And then, out of nowhere, I felt it. This cold, suffocating presence in the room with me. My chest tightened, and I couldn't bring myself to move. I didn't want to look, but something inside me knew what was there. When I finally opened my eyes, I saw him. The clown, standing at the foot of my bed. His grin was wider than I'd ever seen, stretching unnaturally across his face, almost like it was being pulled apart. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, holding a single red balloon. I could hear the faint squeak of it brushing against his glove as he shifted his weight, but he didn't speak. He never spoke. The silence was unbearable. I wanted to scream, but it was like my voice had been stolen. I tried to sit up, to run, to do anything, but I couldn't. It was like I was paralyzed, trapped in this moment of pure terror. His eyes, they weren't normal. They were hollow, like deep black voids that sucked all the light out of the room. And yet, they were watching me, following my every movement, even though I hadn't moved at all. It felt like hours, like time had completely stopped, and I was stuck in that horrifying moment forever. I didn't know if I was still dreaming, or if this was real. And then, without warning, he floated, yes, floated, out of the room, his feet never touching the ground. The balloon trailed behind him like it was tethered to my fear. I lay there, frozen, staring at the doorway long after he was gone. It took everything in me to get up, to force myself to check if he was really gone. But he'd left something behind, a red balloon, bobbing gently in the hallway like some twisted reminder that he could come back whenever he wanted. I stood there staring at it, my mind racing. The next morning, everything felt wrong. I couldn't tell if what had happened was real or just another twisted dream. But when I stepped outside, the neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. And that's when I saw it, colorful balloons tied to my neighbors' doors. One by one, I checked each house. No one answered. The houses were empty, completely abandoned, but the balloons were there, mocking me. I didn't understand what had happened, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. I stood there, looking down the street, feeling like I was the last person alive. The clown had done something, taken them somehow, and I had no idea why I was left behind. Was it a warning? Was I next? The balloons bobbed in the breeze, bright and cheery, but they felt like a death sentence. I couldn't shake the feeling that the clown was still watching, waiting for the right moment to finish what he'd started. And the worst part, I knew deep down that I couldn't stop him. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. My once quiet neighborhood had turned into a ghost town overnight. One by one, my neighbors were vanishing, leaving nothing behind but those brightly colored balloons. It didn't make sense. I knocked on every door, searched every house, but there was no sign of life, no clue as to where they had gone. It was like they had just disappeared. And the clown, he was still out there. I could feel him, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The panic hit me hard. I tried to leave Willow Creek, thinking that maybe I could outrun whatever was happening. I packed a bag, jumped into my car, and drove as fast as I could. But no matter how far I went, I kept ending up back at my house. It was like the town itself wouldn't let me go, like some invisible force was pulling me back. Every road led me back to my street, back to those balloons, back to the feeling of being watched. I was trapped, and I had no idea how to escape. The dreams kept coming, more vivid and terrifying than ever. The clown's grin was the only constant, growing wider, more grotesque. His silence was suffocating, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with each passing day. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. Every time I closed my eyes, even for a second, I saw his face, that horrible, twisted smile. It felt like he was everywhere, in my dreams, in the shadows, in the very air around me. I was losing my mind, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Desperation took over. I started barricading myself inside the house, thinking that maybe I could keep him out. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't work. He didn't need doors or windows to get in. He was already inside. Inside my head, inside my soul. The colorful balloons outside seemed to multiply, mocking me with their bright, cheery colors. I'd hear the faint squeak of a balloon brushing against the side of the house at night, but when I'd look outside, there was nothing there. Just more silence. More waiting. I started to wonder if I was the only one left. The entire town was empty, and it felt like I was the last person alive. The loneliness was unbearable, but the fear was worse. I knew the clown was still out there, somewhere, watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to finish what he'd started. But why me? Why had I been left behind when everyone else was gone? The questions gnawed at me, but the answers never came. All I knew was that I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. As the days dragged on, I could feel myself slipping. The clown wasn't just a nightmare anymore. He was real, and he was coming for me. The balloons were everywhere now, filling the street, bobbing in the breeze like sinister omens of what was to come. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know why this was happening, needed to confront the clown once and for all. But part of me knew that even if I did, it wouldn't change anything. The fear had taken root, and there was no way to stop it now. And so, I wait. I sit here in my house, surrounded by balloons, knowing that it's only a matter of time before the clown comes back for me. He's out there somewhere, watching, waiting. And when he does come, I know there's no escape. He's been feeding off my fear for too long now, and he's not going to stop until I'm gone, just like everyone else. But until then, I'm stuck in this never-ending nightmare, knowing that no matter what I do, he'll always be there. I'll never forget that birthday party. I was only 7, and my parents had gone all out, hiring this clown named Jolly Jack. We lived in a small town, Brookville, quiet, safe, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. I remember being excited, like any kid would be, but the moment Jolly Jack walked into the backyard, something felt off. His movements were jerky, almost like he didn't quite fit in his own skin, and his laugh, it was forced, like he didn't actually find anything funny. But you know how kids are. We just kept playing, pretending everything was normal. When he started doing tricks, I couldn't take my eyes off him, but not in a good way. His smile was just wrong. Too wide, like it was painted on with extra care to look perfect, but the longer I stared, the more it felt like a mask hiding something underneath. My friends didn't seem to notice, though. They were all laughing, chasing balloons, while I stood there, frozen. And then when the party was winding down, I saw him look at me. Not at the group, just me. His eyes were locked onto mine, and he didn't blink, not once. I still get chills thinking about that stare. He didn't move, didn't smile any wider, just kept looking at me with this smirk, like he knew something I didn't. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was just being silly. But that night, when I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing him in my head, that face, that grin. And then, as I drifted off, I had the worst dream. He was standing outside my window, staring up at me, his face cracked and peeling, the paint falling away like dead skin. It was just a dream, right? That's what I kept telling myself. But when I woke up, I felt different, uneasy, like something had shifted. I didn't tell anyone about the dream, though. What would they say? I mean, it was just a clown at a party, nothing to worry about, except I couldn't shake the feeling that Jolly Jack wasn't done with me. It sounds crazy, I know, but that was the last time I ever enjoyed my birthday. As I went about my day, I tried to push the memory of that smile out of my head. But every time I closed my eyes, there he was, just standing there, watching. His cracked makeup, peeling like old paint, haunted me. I didn't know it then, but that party would be the last normal day of my life. Things were about to get so much worse, but I had no way of knowing. After that party, things didn't go back to normal like I'd hoped. It started with small things, like feeling someone watching me when no one was around. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, just a kid with an overactive imagination. But then, one night, I saw him. Jolly Jack was standing across the street from my house, perfectly still. I stared out the window for what felt like forever, waiting for him to move, to do something, anything. But he didn't. He just stood there, grinning that same awful grin. I tried to tell my parents, but they just brushed it off. "It's just a clown, Sarah," they'd say. "You're probably still scared from the party. It's nothing." But I knew it wasn't nothing. I knew what I saw. Every night after that, he'd be there, standing in the exact same spot. He never came closer, never knocked on the door. He just watched. I couldn't understand why no one else saw him. It was like he was invisible to everyone but me. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear faint, distant laughter. My parents started getting frustrated with me. They thought I was making it up, that I was just trying to get attention. But I wasn't. I was terrified. I'd sit by my window, peeking through the blinds, and there he'd be, night after night. His makeup started to change, though. The bright, colorful paint began to crack and peel. His smile grew wider, more distorted, and his eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, seemed to sink deeper into his skull with every passing day. I wanted to scream, but what good would it do? No one believed me. It wasn't just the sight of him that scared me, though. It was the feeling I got whenever he was there. Like something dark and twisted was creeping into my mind, taking root. Every night the laughter grew louder, the sound bouncing around inside my head until it was all I could hear. I tried to block it out, but it was no use. Jolly Jack was getting closer, inch by inch, even if he didn't physically move. It was like he was worming his way into my life, piece by piece. By this point, I had given up trying to convince my parents. They just got angry whenever I brought it up, telling me I was too old to be scared of clowns. But how could I not be? His presence was becoming impossible to ignore. Every night he stood a little closer, his makeup more decayed, his grin more sinister. I started to wonder if this was what losing your mind felt like. I was seeing something no one else could see, hearing things no one else could hear. It was maddening. As the nights went on, I started to feel like I was trapped, not just in my house, but in my own mind. I couldn't escape him no matter how hard I tried. His image was burned into my brain, his laughter ringing in my ears even when he wasn't there. I knew deep down that something terrible was coming, but I didn't know what. And the worst part, I was completely alone in it. My parents, my friends, they had no idea what was happening to me. That night, everything changed. I woke up in the middle of the night to this eerie silence that immediately felt wrong. The house was too quiet. You know how sometimes you wake up and just know something's off? That's exactly how I felt. I called out for my parents, but there was no answer. My heart started racing as I got out of bed and walked down the hall. Their bedroom door was open, but when I peeked inside, the bed was empty. No sign of them anywhere. At first, I thought maybe they had gone out for something, but it was the middle of the night. Where could they have gone? I checked the living room, the kitchen, nothing. I ran back to their room, hoping to find some kind of clue, but all I found was a mirror in the bathroom. Written across it, in what looked like red lipstick, were the words, "You're next." My stomach dropped. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew exactly who had written it. I panicked. My first instinct was to call the police, so I did. I tried to explain everything, the clown, the message, my missing parents. But when the officers arrived, they didn't take me seriously. They treated it like a simple runaway case, said maybe my parents had a fight and just needed some time alone. But I knew better. I knew. Jolly Jack had something to do with it. That awful grin was all I could picture as I sat there, helpless, while the police brushed it off as nothing. After they left, I sat in the house, paralyzed with fear. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart jump. I was completely alone. That's when the visits started becoming more frequent. I'd see him almost every night, his figure lurking outside, closer now. His makeup was worse than ever, cracked, peeling, revealing something underneath that wasn't human. His eyes were dark, empty holes, and his grin, it was so wide now, like it was splitting his face in two. I knew he was waiting for me, just like he had waited for my parents. The worst part was that I couldn't tell anyone. No one believed me, not the police, not my friends. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown, that my parents had just left and I was making up stories to cope. But I wasn't. I knew what was happening. Jolly Jack was still out there, and he wasn't done yet. Every night I'd see him, feel him getting closer, like he was playing some kind of sick game. And every night, the fear got worse. There was nowhere I could go, nowhere I could hide. I was trapped in that house, trapped in my own mind, haunted by that grinning face. And the message on the mirror, it wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. He was coming for me, and I had no idea how to stop him. As the years went by, Jolly Jack didn't disappear like I had hoped. In fact, he became more unpredictable. Some months I wouldn't see him at all, and I'd start to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, he was gone for good. But then, out of nowhere, he'd show up again, always catching me off guard. I could be walking down the street or sitting in my living room, and suddenly, there he'd be, standing in the distance, that same wide, decayed grin staring back at me. It's like he enjoyed playing these twisted mind games, keeping me constantly on edge. I tried moving on with my life, tried to make friends, go to work, pretend everything was normal. But the clown always found a way to remind me that I wasn't safe. Over time, people who got too close to me started disappearing, just like my parents. First, it was my childhood friend, the only one who hadn't dismissed my story as nonsense. We had a sleepover one night, and the next morning, she was gone. No sign of a struggle, no clues, just gone. That's when I realized that Jolly Jack wasn't just after me anymore. My aunt came to stay with me for a few weeks, thinking it would help ease my paranoia. I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. I didn't want her involved, but she insisted. At first, everything seemed fine, but then she started noticing strange things, small objects going missing, lights flickering, and that eerie laughter in the distance. One night, she told me she saw a figure standing outside my window, but when we looked, no one was there. A week later, she was gone too, vanished without a trace. It was always the same pattern. People would enter my life, try to help, and then they'd just disappear. It wasn't long before I stopped letting anyone in. I couldn't bear the thought of being responsible for someone else's disappearance. The police didn't even take me seriously anymore. To them, I was the crazy woman with the clown story. I couldn't blame them. How do you explain something like this? A clown that no one else sees, who comes and goes as he pleases, taking people with him. It sounds insane, even to me. The thing is, I knew Jolly Jack wasn't done. Every time I thought he was gone for good, he'd reappear, usually when I least expected it. I'd hear his laughter echoing through the walls, faint but unmistakable. I'd catch glimpses of him in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, he was never there. It was like he existed in the shadows, always lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The fear became a constant companion, something I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. People stopped visiting me. Friends drifted away, either too scared or too fed up with my strange behavior. I was completely alone, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The clown's presence was everywhere, his laughter in my ears, his grin burned into my memory. I knew it was only a matter of time before he came back for me. The worst part? I had no idea when or how, but I knew he would, and that was enough to keep me in a constant state of dread. Now, as an adult, I thought moving to a new city would finally give me the fresh start I so desperately needed. I changed my name, left Brookville behind, and tried to rebuild my life. For a while, it worked. I got a new job, made some new friends, and even started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had escaped him. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before Jolly Jack found me again. It's like no matter how far I run, he's always just a step behind, waiting. It started with the dreams. Every night I'd see him, his decaying face, that monstrous smile stretching across his face like his skin was ripping apart. In my dreams he was closer than ever, his breath on the back of my neck. his laughter echoing in the dark corners of my mind. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, knowing that it wasn't just a nightmare. I could feel him. He was real, and he was near. My new coworkers began noticing my paranoia, the way I'd jump at every sound, the way I'd avoid talking about my past. I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I? No one ever believes me. They'd just think I was crazy like everyone else. But I knew better. I started seeing him again, out of the corner of my eye, in reflections, always there, always watching. His face had decayed even more, his eyes now just dark, hollow pits, his smile impossibly wide, as if his entire face was splitting open. Every time I blinked, he seemed closer, like he was closing in on me, inch by inch, until I couldn't breathe. I stopped going out as much. My apartment became a prison, the walls closing in as I waited for the inevitable. I'd hear faint giggles late at night, the same sound I'd heard all those years ago. The same sound that haunted my childhood. It's like he was teasing me, letting me know that he was still there, that he'd never truly left. No matter how hard I tried to push him out of my mind, he was always there, lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My coworkers started pulling away. They didn't say it outright, but I could see it in their faces, the way they looked at me, like I was some ticking time bomb. They didn't understand that I wasn't crazy. I was just trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I tried to keep up appearances, to act normal, but it was getting harder every day. I could feel Jolly Jack's presence, growing stronger, closer. I knew that one day soon, he'd come for me, just like he came for my parents, my friends, my aunt. I don't know when it will happen, but I know it's coming. I see him every night now, standing in the corner of my bedroom, his face twisted into that grotesque smile, his eyes locked on mine. He never moves, never speaks, but I can feel his presence suffocating me. I'm not sure how much longer I can hold on. There's no escape from him, no way out of this nightmare. He's coming for me, and when he does, I'll be just another name on the list of people he's taken. All I can do now is wait. Wait for the day when Jolly Jack finally comes to collect me, just like he's been promising all these years. Because in the end, no matter how hard you try to run or hide, you can't escape him. He's always watching, always waiting. And one day, when you least expect it, he'll come for you too. My name is Michael Carter, and I'm a mechanic by trade, but trust me, what I'm about to share has nothing to do with fixing cars. I'm 32 now, but this all started when I was 12. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where nothing much happens and everyone knows each other's business. Our house was old, passed down from my grandparents, and had a basement that always creeped me out. I didn't go down there much, but one day while helping my dad clean up, I found something that would change everything, an old clown costume. It was hidden in the back, covered in dust, like it hadn't been touched in years. I remember pulling it out from behind some rusted tools and old boxes, thinking it was just another random thing from the past. The colors were faded, but the smile painted on the mask was as clear as day, wide red and unsettling. At first, it seemed harmless, just an odd find, and I even laughed it off. Who keeps a creepy clown costume in their basement, right? But there was something about it, something that didn't sit right with me, even back then. I asked my parents about it, but they acted like they had no idea where it came from. My dad shrugged it off, saying it might have belonged to one of my uncles or something, and that was that. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, after dinner, I found myself wandering back downstairs to look at it again. The costume hadn't moved or anything, but standing there, staring at it, I felt this strange pull. It was like it wanted me to try it on, and honestly, being a dumb kid, I did. Putting it on was the first mistake. The fabric felt cold, like it had been sitting in ice. But it wasn't just that. As soon as I slipped the mask over my face, I felt this rush of something. It wasn't excitement or fun, but more like a jolt of energy, something darker. I looked at myself in the mirror, and even though I could see my eyes through the holes in the mask, it didn't feel like I was looking at myself. The painted smile seemed to stretch wider, and for a second I swear it moved. That night, I had the worst dream I'd ever had up until then. I was standing in my room, but everything felt off. The walls were too close, and the shadows stretched way too far. And then I saw it. In the mirror, standing behind me, was the clown, only it wasn't just a reflection. It was there, smiling, watching me with eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing, and ran to my parents' room, but I didn't tell them. How could I? They wouldn't have believed me. The thing is, after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something from the basement, something connected to that clown costume, had followed me upstairs. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear, I felt it watching me, even during the day. I'd catch glimpses of that painted smile in the corners of my vision, but when I'd turn to look, nothing would be there. But I knew. Deep down, I knew that whatever it wasn't just in my head. And the worst part, that was only the beginning. After that first night, things went downhill fast. It's funny, really, how you can try to convince yourself that what you're experiencing isn't real. But those dreams, they were too vivid to ignore. Every time I fell asleep, I'd find myself back in that room, but the walls seemed even closer, the shadows darker, and the clown, God, the clown. It was always there, standing in the same corner, with that grotesque painted smile. Only this time, it wasn't just watching, it was getting closer. Each night, the dreams became more intense. The clown's eyes, which had once been lifeless, now glowed with a horrible, malicious light. I could feel its presence, heavy and suffocating, like it was weighing down on my chest. And that smile, it grew wider with every dream, almost as if it was feeding off my fear. I'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. I'd look around, expecting to see the clown standing there in the shadows of my room, but it was never there. At least, not that I could see. The scariest part was how real it all felt. You know how some dreams fade away the moment you wake up? These didn't. I could still feel the cold touch of the clown's breath on my skin, hear the faint squeak of its shoes as it moved closer. It was like the dream followed me into the waking world, and I couldn't shake it off. My days became a blur of exhaustion, but no matter how tired I was, I dreaded falling asleep, because I knew it was waiting for me. At first, I didn't tell anyone. How could I? Who would believe that a clown costume from the basement was haunting my dreams? It sounded insane, even to me, but I couldn't deny the feeling that something was wrong. Every morning, I'd wake up feeling more and more drained, like the clown was somehow feeding off my fear, growing stronger each night. And it wasn't just in my dreams anymore. I started hearing things, small, almost imperceptible sounds. The faint honk of a clown's horn, the distant sound of laughter, always just out of reach. But the worst part was the basement. I tried to stay away, but I couldn't. Something kept pulling me back down there, like an invisible force was dragging me toward that costume. I'd stand at the top of the stairs, staring down into the darkness, my heart racing, my palms sweaty. Every time I gathered the courage to go down, I'd find the costume right where I left it, still and lifeless. But I could feel it watching me, waiting. And then came the day when I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went down to the basement hoping to throw the damn thing away. But the moment I touched it, a jolt of fear shot through me. It wasn't just a costume. I knew it then. Whatever was happening, whatever was tormenting me in my dreams, it was connected to that clown, and I had no idea how to make it stop. After those nightmares, things took a turn for the worse. At first I thought maybe it was all in my head, that somehow the dreams had messed with my mind. But then, the costume started showing up in places it shouldn't have been. I'd leave it in the basement, locked away in an old trunk, only to find it hanging in my closet the next morning. At first, I thought maybe my parents were playing a prank on me, but they swore up and down they hadn't touched it. That's when I started to get really scared. It wasn't just my closet either. I'd come home from school and find the clown costume draped over the couch like it had been sitting there waiting for me. Sometimes I'd find it in the kitchen, sitting at the table as if it were about to have dinner with us. My parents never seemed to notice, and I couldn't understand why. I mean, how do you ignore a clown costume that keeps moving around the house? But to them, It was like nothing had changed. They just kept going about their lives while I was slowly losing my mind. The more the costume appeared, the more I felt its presence. It sounds crazy, but it was like the clown knew something I didn't. Like it was toying with me, testing how far it could push me before I snapped. Every time I saw it, the painted smile seemed more sinister, the colors more vibrant, almost like the costume was coming to life. And the worst part, no matter where I found it, I always felt this overwhelming urge to put it on again, even though I knew it wasn't safe. I tried everything to get rid of it. I threw it in the trash, but the next day it was back in my room, perfectly folded on my bed. I even tried burning it once, but when I checked the ashes, there was no trace of the costume. It was like it couldn't be destroyed, like it was tied to me somehow. And with every failed attempt to get rid of it, my fear grew. I started to wonder if the clown wasn't just haunting me, it was becoming part of me. I couldn't tell my parents. I mean, how do you explain something like that without sounding completely insane? So, I kept it to myself, hoping that maybe if I ignored it, the clown would go away. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Every time I found the costume in a new spot, it felt like the clown was getting closer, like it was creeping its way into my life, one step at a time. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. Even when the costume wasn't there, I could feel those cold, lifeless eyes on me, always just out of sight. It was like the clown was waiting for the perfect moment to make its move, and I knew, whatever was coming next, I wasn't ready for it. I still remember the night everything changed. It started like any other, me lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to close my eyes. I'd gotten used to the nightmares by then, but that night something felt different. The air in my room was thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I could hear this faint sound, almost like breathing, coming from the corner of my room. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew. I wasn't alone. Slowly, I turned my head toward the corner, and that's when I saw it. The clown costume wasn't hanging limp like it usually was. No, this time, it was standing up, filled with something. Something that wasn't human. The fabric stretched tight, like there was a body inside. But the arms and legs moved in this unnatural, jerky way. And then, I saw the face. The painted smile was no longer just paint. It was dripping, dark and wet, like the thing was bleeding. The eyes. They weren't just empty holes anymore. They were alive, glowing with this sick, twisted light. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat felt like it was being crushed, like the clown's presence was squeezing the life out of me. All I could do was watch as it took slow, deliberate steps toward my bed. The closer it got, the more I could smell it. This sickly sweet stench, like rotting candy and decay. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't do anything but lie there, helpless, as the clown stood over me. Its smile stretched impossibly wide, the red smears dripping onto the floor as it leaned closer, inches from my face. I could feel its breath, cold and foul, as it whispered in a voice that didn't sound like it belonged to this world. I don't even remember what it said, just that it was wrong, like the words themselves were twisted and broken. And then, in one horrifying moment, it reached out and touched me. The cold, wet fabric of its glove pressed against my skin, and I swear I felt something crawl beneath it. That was the last time I ever slept. I don't know how, but somehow I managed to survive that night. When the sun came up, the clown was gone, and the costume was back in its usual place, lying limp in the corner like nothing had happened. But I knew better. It wasn't just a costume anymore. It was alive, and it wanted something from me. The nightmares stopped after that, but in a way things got worse, because now I wasn't just dreaming about the clown. It was real, and it was waiting for me to make the next move. I couldn't stay in that room anymore. Every time I walked in, I felt its eyes on me, felt that horrible presence lingering in the air. So, I started sleeping on the couch, or at least pretending to sleep. But no matter where I went in the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there. lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. After that night, everything changed. I couldn't go near the basement without feeling like I was being watched. It wasn't just paranoia, it was real. I could sense the clown down there, lurking in the darkness, waiting. Every time I walked past the basement door, I heard things. Soft, almost imperceptible noises, like shuffling feet or the faint creak of floorboards. Sometimes I even thought I heard laughter, but not the kind that makes you smile. This was low, guttural, like something was mocking me from the shadows. I stopped sleeping entirely. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I felt its presence. The worst part was that it wasn't just in my head anymore. I could feel the weight of it. This suffocating pressure, like the air itself, was thick with fear. My parents kept asking what was wrong, but I couldn't tell them. They wouldn't understand. How could they? They hadn't seen the clown, hadn't felt its cold, dead eyes watching them from the corner of the room. It was my nightmare to live with alone. I tried everything to keep it at bay. I started avoiding the basement altogether, even going as far as locking the door, but it didn't help. No matter where I went in the house, I knew it was still there, just waiting. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd hear footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like something was pacing just beneath the floorboards. I'd lie there frozen, praying it wouldn't come upstairs. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it did. I couldn't keep living like this. I tried leaving the house, staying with friends, even booking a motel for a few nights, but the clown followed me. Or at least, the fear did. No matter where I went, I could feel it, this constant creeping dread, like the clown was always just a step behind me. I started seeing its face in reflections, in mirrors, in windows, even in puddles on the street. That painted smile, stretched wide and dripping, was everywhere I looked. The laughter haunted me too. It started soft, barely audible, but it grew louder the longer I tried to ignore it. Sometimes it was in the background of conversations, blending in with the noise of the day. Other times it was in my dreams, or what little sleep I managed to get. But the worst moments were when the laughter came out of nowhere, piercing the silence when I least expected it. It would echo through the house, and I knew, without a doubt, that the clown was coming back. I live in fear now, every day. I can't shake the feeling that the clown is still in the basement, biding its time. I haven't seen it since that night, but I know it's only a matter of time. It's waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to strike again. And when it does, I know I won't be able to escape it this time. Because the truth is, the clown was never just in the basement. It's in my mind, in my soul, and no matter how far I run, I can't outrun what's already inside me.